Good morning, everybody. We're absolutely delighted to welcome our friends from Polymateria again for another webinar to talk about this fascinating company. Today, we're delighted to introduce the CEO, Neil Dunn, and the Head of Ventures and Corporate Development, Andrew Webster. So I will hand over straight away, in the interest of time, to Neil. Good morning, Neil.
Morning, Simon. Thank you very much for hosting us. Just wanted to share my screen and bring up some slides to bring everybody through the presentation, which will give you the context within which our business is operating, both in terms of the market and also the issue that we have been set up to address. We'll go through the technology in detail and also how, through a combination of a regulatory strategy, partnerships, which is really important to driving scale, and also disruptive communication strategies, we are bringing the technology forward to make an indelible impact on what is unfortunately becoming a 100 million ton per annum problem. So if you can just let me share my screen, and Simon, you might nod when you can see the presentation. Okay, very good. So first things first, we are a London-based advanced tech technology, 7 years old. The business has really existed through three key areas. The first era was based in Imperial Innovations in London and bringing together polymer science, biology, chemistry to really understand the landscape. And the challenge set by our founders was, why had nothing else in this space worked? There was issues with credibility and scalability. And this is going back to 2014, 2015, with all other solutions on the landscape. So the team in that first era were very focused on doing what we would classically call a gap analysis, getting under the skin of a lot of the technical limitations and systems level limitations. And with the early seed capital that was put in place, coming up with robust answers to a lot of those particular challenges. We then moved into the next era, which was really realizing that we had produced some groundbreaking evidence and data on the issue itself, and needed to create new standards to give industry and also regulators confidence that what we were able to do in our business was replicable at a systems level globally. So we chose the British Standards Institution, but also worked with ASTM in America, CEN in Europe as part of a collaboration to create new standards on things that are very obvious, like when you biodegrade plastic, don't create microplastic, don't harm nature. And also what you do in a lab should reflect the real world. This sounds incredibly obvious to say, but there were no standards before we came along. So we created a lot of peer-reviewed papers, third-party reports, and through the BSI's process, launched a new standard, and that standard is now being used in 13 different countries all around the world. So that was really our second era, that real obsession with the technology. The era we're now in for the last year has been to take that same obsession with our technology into our customers, into that partnership, and to really rewire the business to be very focused on the biggest customers that we have developed in the world, and those partnerships, and to line up the entire business, no matter where you are in the organization, to be agile, be responsive, and have that solutions mindset kind of defining our entire culture, and able to work together in a very multidisciplined, multifaceted way to deliver scale and growth to our customers. We've hired a new Chief Commercial Officer, Richard Horn, 10 months ago, and Richard has been a great addition to the leadership team, as indeed Stephen Altman-Richer, who joined us from Tesla just before him to drive our regulatory work, and Andrew, who leads all of our big ventures programs. That's our work with Indorama, our work with Cordex, who are one of the largest players in the agricultural space. All of those ventures programs are a real driver of the medium term and long term growth of the business. So if I'll just move on for a second to talk for just maybe a minute about the issue of plastic pollution. So I mentioned we're 7 years old, and when we were set up, the world produced 315 million tons of plastic. And next year, it looks like the world is going to produce 400 million tons of plastic. So we wanted to really drill into what are the end states of plastic. And you'll see here that 14% is recycled, but only really 2% of that is properly recycled. It's mostly downcycled or lost somewhere within the system. 14% goes back onto the energy grid, becomes electricity. 40% is buried in landfill, so kind of stored up for other generations. It's effectively mummified. What we were interested in is the 32% that's winding up in nature. That's the biggest problem. So we wanted to really diagnose that issue. And there's two other really interesting data points that we concluded in the early stage of our business, that 31% of that 32 are polyolefins. This is polyethylene and polypropylene. That's the most likely type of material. It's food packaging to me and you. That's the stuff that's most likely to wind up in the natural environment. Another really interesting data point is that whilst a lot of the obsession is with the oceans from media and broader stakeholders, the biggest problem is actually on land. So 80% of all ocean plastic gets there from land. And all the experts working on ocean plastic say one thing: if we want to solve ocean plastic, we have to turn off the taps. We have to stop it on land. So that was our mandate, was to go back and to really understand polyolefins on land. How can we create something scientifically robust and scalable to address? And as I said at the start, that is becoming 100 million ton per annum problem. The markets we are focused on, and we can go into this in further presentations, like Philippines, Malaysia, Thailand, India, the number is much greater. That 32% is a global average that allows for Europe and US as well. And even though Europe would feel it doesn't necessarily have a plastic waste problem, there's two things happening there under the surface. One, the Mediterranean is the biggest concentration of microplastic on the planet. And two, Europe and the US are exporting a lot of their plastic waste and claiming it as recycled to a lot of these countries who have these unmanaged waste facilities. So like climate change, this really is a global problem and needs a global response. So a lot of our data has been created with that in mind. So if I can just another minute on the landscape, and this was as true in 2015 as it is today when we were set up. There was a spectrum of technologies. There were technologies claiming biodegradation of plastic, but all they were really doing was adding salt to plastic. It's a really simple thing. You and I can do it. You fragment plastic. If you do that, it creates microplastic. It's taking a big problem and creating millions of little problems. So scientifically not very credible. There's also solutions claiming they will work in landfill, but when you look at their data, it's based on anaerobic conditions. So that's composting, not reflective of what happens in landfill. So, also not very credible. There's more credibility in the composting solution, where you've got some of the biggest chemical companies and businesses in the world involved here, but the limitation is really one of scale with this particular swim lane, where you need specialist facilities for these materials to have any chance of biodegrading. They're 3 times the cost of traditional plastic. They can't go into recycling. It's seen as a contaminant. So you need to have these specialist facilities. I was speaking to you today from the UK. Only 4% of people in the UK have access to a composting facility, industrial composting facility. So nonetheless, for 20 years, this has been seen as part of the way we are going to solve this particular problem. More recently, a technology called PHA or PHB has come along, which is actually brilliant at biodegradation, but about 5 to 6 times the cost of traditional plastics. It's made mostly through fermentation, and a lot of the facilities out there that we know of are able to make about 5,000 tons per annum, and with SPACs and so on, scaling to 20,000 tons per annum. Just to come back to the size of this issue, it's a 100 million ton per annum problem we're trying to solve here. So part of the solution, but very much a niche part of the solution. And probably the biggest limiting factor here is the stability of the materials. Because it's so good at biodegradation, it will biodegrade if you have moisture in your factory. It will biodegrade if it rains on your shopping bag on the way home. So there's a real challenge with getting the material stable enough, long enough for it to perform the usefulness that industry and consumers would have confidence in it. Nonetheless, definitely, part of the solution. So for all of these reasons, we created biotransformation to address a lot of the limitations on the landscape. And again, this is going back to when we were set up in 2015. So just to explain what we have developed, and again, very happy to go into the detail of the chemistry that sits behind this, and the evidence and the data and the peer-reviewed papers and so on. But the first phase, maybe to pick up and explain, is the ability to time control the technology. So we can program it in at point of manufacture, and we can do it either in the resin when the resin is being made, or as a master batch, a bespoke master batch in the packaging when the packaging is being made. We can deploy and have proven it in both of those parts of the value chain. And we can dial up or dial down the part of the master batch that gives it this masking effect. So things like bread bags in Kenya, we can program to last as long as 6 months. More rigid cups like this one here that we launched with Prince Charles at COP26 can last as long as 3 years, and we can program it, tune it to the exact month. This allows you to communicate to the consumer a recycle by date or a dispose by date, something they're very familiar with from food packaging, this concept of perishability or use by dates. The very last slide, I'll show you how we're using that in the consumer communications, but that is one of the key features of the technology that overcomes a lot of the limitations with some of the competitive swim lanes. So once the time is up, the first thing then that happens is the transformation of the materials. So what is very unique about the technology is the ability to go in and take what was a plastic, a polymer, and transform it into its wax-like state, and scientifically evidence that through the pass-fail criteria that we created as part of the British standard. And in there you have criteria that evidence unequivocally your plastic has transformed into a wax. There's no sense that it could become a microplastic or even a nanoplastic once you have achieved those criteria. So that happens very quickly, as you can see here in the time frame. Once the time is up, we have done this in real world conditions, where in as quickly as 30 days, you're seeing the materials become wax-like in terms of their state. And you're all very welcome to come and visit our labs, where you can touch and feel these materials, and you can see it in a range of everything from agricultural applications to non-woven materials to this cup becoming wax-like. And we call that the jaw drop moment. When people touch it, when they feel it, they get very excited, because they know that this is behaving very much like a candle. When you light a candle and the wax runs down the side, it feels like that in terms of its physical composition. But it doesn't end there. The other part of the technology is a prebiotic aspect, and that prebiotic then makes the greaser wax attractive to naturally occurring microbes and fungi and bacteria. And it's really those things together that have allowed us to take polyethylene films fully back to nature in 226 days, and rigid thermoform cups fully back to nature in 336 days. And we've done that in mesophilic conditions. This is the kind of the breakthrough, if you want, that has showed the world a new way of thinking about plastic pollution and how to tackle it at scale. So I mentioned the British standards, just to maybe call out a couple of reasons why this is so important. The pass-fail criteria that are in this to evidence no microplastic, to evidence no harm to nature today or no harm to nature tomorrow, and also what you do in a lab reflects the real world. All of this has taken existing ISO and existing ASTM standards that are known, but added the rigorous pass-fail criteria that are required in each instance. And this is now being used in 13 different countries all around the world in various degrees, the largest being India, the smallest being Georgia, Philippines, Malaysia, Ecuador, all at various stages of adoption in between. So this is a fantastic tool in a way that we've taken the outcomes that our technology is able to achieve, but enshrined it in goalposts that legislators can take forward. So when they are banning plastic but giving exemptions for certain innovation, they can look to standards like this, either creating their own national standard as they've done in Philippines and Hungary, or evolving it to be based on this, but tweaked or changed in some way, or just copying and pasting, as they've done in the case of Georgia, taking this exact standard and using it locally. So on the other phases, I don't propose I go into this in huge detail today, but on the pass-fail that are required in each instance, in order to show in stage one that you're not creating microplastic or nanoplastic, you have to achieve these kind of 4 key pass-fail criteria. The reduction in molecular weight, as is evidenced by achieving greater than 90% molecular weight reduction, proving that the viscosity or the MZ value is less than 30,000, and also your MN, your Daltons, are less than 5,000. Scientists would look at this and understand that you're now evidencing you're creating a very low molecular weight material that is biologically available, as evidenced by the increase in carbonyl index. This is the anchor points within the material emerging, where nature is starting to attack and assimilate and colonize it. So all of these are rigorous pass-fail criteria guarding against microplastic creation. And then finally, as that wax is being assimilated, you want to make sure that it's not harming nature, either in terrestrial or freshwater ecosystems. So these OECD acute and chronic checks are also critical to ensuring that that's not happening. And then finally, within a reasonable time frame, so the standard says 2 years, even though we have done it in less than a year, you have to achieve full biodegradation. So this is your carbon, your wax becomes greater than 90% CO2 with only water and biomass remaining. So the water is through the biomass, or the microbes and fungi and bacteria, attacking and assimilating and colonizing the materials. They create water as part of that process. So you get completely back to natural outputs, natural outcomes within a 2-year time frame. So recyclability, I've just this slide, and then I want to kind of finish up with consumer communications, and then maybe take some questions. We also wanted to prove recyclability at scale, because when you think about what's required to solve this 100 million ton per annum problem, you can't have recycling and biodegradation at odds with each other. You have to have them working together. That was the original vision for the circular economy, as articulated in Cradle to Cradle by Bill McDonough, also in the book Harmony by Prince Charles, this concept that everything goes back to nature sooner or later anyway, but within our human-made technical cycle, we have to give recycling every chance. But as and when it leaks or it goes back to nature, that has to occur without any problems. So our technology has been developed both to be recyclable and biodegradable, consistent with that initial vision. We've evidenced that at the Impact Recycling Centre of Excellence in Scotland, through the testing through the Recyclass protocols, also at CPET in India, and continue as part of our consumer campaign and experiences show and evidence the fact that recycling can happen at scale, and these two things don't have to be at odds from each other, and as opposed to just sharing reports and evidence and data, actually creating experiences. So let me just conclude by playing a little video with how we were taking this forward to consumers, to take an awful lot of science and make it very simple, very inspiring for consumers to drive the change. Another big thing that we realized looking at the landscape is that the consumers are very confused by the alternatives and the different actions they have to take. So by making them central to the change that needs to happen and tapping into their agency and their advocacy, we've created a brand that does just that. It borrows from what maybe Oatly have done in the the oat-based milk alternative space, and takes that kind of campaigning or movement building mindset in to focusing on consumers. But in our case, we'll be looking at stadiums, sports events, and festivals using the power of fans, teams, and celebrity advocacy and endorsement to really kind of drive this part forward. And the reason we're able to do this is by the time control aspect. We can give people time to use the materials, time to act responsibly, time to do the right thing, time for recycling to happen and get it back in the system. And then we can turn it into something else. Like, for example, the bracelet I'm wearing on my hand here today. So we can really create a whole campaign around this because we're able to time control the technology. So let me just conclude with how we're bringing the consumer piece forward.
The oceans are what connects us. And we are intrinsically linked to them through our daily actions. Nearly 1/3 of all plastic we use escapes into nature. With 80% of plastic in the ocean flowing from land, ocean plastic pollution is one of the greatest environmental problems of our time. We are a generation demanding change. This is Lifecycle, the world's first self-destructing plastic technology, a solution that can prevent 450 million tons of plastic from reaching our oceans by 2040. That's the equivalent of 8 million cargo planes. But don't take our word for it. Tested and approved by independent laboratories, our technology transforms plastic into an earth-friendly wax and enables it to fully biodegrade within 2 years. This process is triggered by 4 key elements: heat, air, moisture, and sunlight. The wax that remains becomes food for microbes, allowing the cycle of life to continue in harmony with nature. The solution is here, and consumers are ready for change. But global brands play a key role in taking this technology to scale. By partnering with disruptive brands at music festivals, through public events, and on supermarket shelves, consumers can take action to solve the ocean plastic pollution crisis. Nine countries, 4 continents, 9 activations, 500,000 cups saved from the ocean. Inspired by nature, powered by science.
Okay, let me just wrap up there, and just maybe to summarize. So the strategy you're using to bring the technology forward is a combination of disruption in the regulatory space, where the British standard is key, and creating impact and momentum, in particular in those 13 countries all around the world, but focus specifically on where plastic pollution is a real problem and the infrastructure is lacking. Also key partnerships, the likes of Indorama, I've mentioned, Cordex and others, to really take the technology forward at scale. And finally, people power, the power of consumers to drive and demand this, whether it's just simply in the form of a kite mark and recognizing packaging that is ours and that is different, or more broadly as part of experiences, as part of the movement, and championing and driving the change. So on the headlines from a commercial perspective, just to conclude there, we're beating the plans that we set forward for our investors over the course of this year. We're ahead of plan. We expect to close the year at about 3.2 million in revenue. In 2024, we're projecting forward to being north of 30 million, and 2025, 2026, getting close to 80 million in revenue. So there's a really exciting growth story here, being enabled by what we're seeing coming through in both the regulatory space and through the commitments that those big partners are making to us in the terms of licensing deals, exclusive arrangements, and so on. So Simon, let me just stop there and see if you want to add anything before maybe taking some questions, or Andrew, if there's anything I haven't mentioned, please do feel free to jump in.
Thanks, Neil. Yeah, the only one thing I would add there is that one of the reasons we're sitting here on this platform this morning with the help of the Mill Trust guys is we're closing off or coming towards the end of our Series B fundraise, which is to raise, I know, up to 20 million. We already have a cornerstone investor who's one of our industrial partners who is committed to put 5 in, which will come into the business after documentation towards the end of this month. We have a further 4 already committed from high net worths that will convert at the same time as the strategic. We have a fund that is putting in up to 5 as well at the same time, and so there's still headroom of somewhere between 6 to 7 million sterling that we're looking to finish up our raise.
Andrew, thank you. That was great. Thank you, Neil. Just in terms of the fundraising, what do you anticipate will be the requirement for future fundraising to get you to a point where the company is self-financing?
So based on the plan that we put forward for potential investors, the fundraising gives us enough headroom to do everything we need to get to cash flow positive, which is the second half of next year under the plan. It gives us a significant headroom to do other things if necessary, or if we need to consolidate, so plenty of time to do that. So there is no requirement in the current plan to take additional fundraising. The only other reason we would do that would be to look at parallel technology acquisitions, or to do something significantly game-changing to activate maybe something further in different markets.
Okay, thank you. Neil, you've referenced quite a lot the developing world, countries that you're operating in around the world, from Ecuador to Georgia to the Philippines, Malaysia, India. What's the reason for the focus on the developing world as opposed to the developed world? Are there different challenges in these parts of the world relative to the developed world on our doorstep?
I see it every day. So when and I spend a lot of my time out there, you know, with governments and with NGOs in these countries, and it's such a visible issue. I guess in a way, climate change is only starting to become. So we're seeing, you know, these record temperatures this year. It's becoming painful for people. But plastic pollution has been painful for people for, you know, a decade or more. Now you could argue, I live in Buckinghamshire here in the UK, and when I run our cycle, I see this stuff in the ditches and the hedgerows all around me, but not like the way you do in India, where, you know, just outside Mumbai, there's literally a plastic city that's just sitting there, and we keep adding to it. And it's not just Indian waste. This is waste that's being exported to them from all around the world. So we're focused there because being a mission-driven business meant that we had to understand the problem, understand where it was biggest, understand the materials that are contributing to the problem, and that has led us there. But I think, like climate change, Simon, it's not something that we can divide between the north and south or the east and the west. We have to take a global approach to solving this problem, because when you find plastic on a beach, you know, in Hawaii, it's probably come from Japan, you know, as an example, or those 5 gyres that are in the oceans, that's come from everywhere. You know, it's come from all around the world. So you know, we talk about the Mediterranean. Europe says it doesn't have a plastic pollution problem. It's all those North African countries that are kind of bordering on the Mediterranean in the most instances that are creating that particular issue, right within in the Mediterranean. So we cannot have a bubble mentality in solving the problem. We have to bring everyone together, but where from a market perspective we're seeing the most pressing need is in the these developing economies.
Just to highlight that, Simon, Neil pointed out 32% of plastic packaging ends up in the environment, so that's a global number. In Europe, a country like Germany is in single digits. The government number in Malaysia is 63% of all packaging ends up in the plastic packaging ends up in the environment, and that's a government number. So the fact that they're quoting 63, you can be pretty certain that it's a much higher than that number.
Yeah, thank you. No, it's an extremely troubling, and I think we're all very conscious of that. When it comes to biodegradation and your particular technology, are there any other competitors in the world in this space that are anywhere close to developing what you have created? And perhaps just to avoid having to ask too many questions, I'll quickly also ask you to comment on the use of funds. What's interesting is, Andrew, you've put together an incredible group of international families, business families, to invest in this business. And you haven't gone the traditional route of the venture capital industry. The sums of money you're raising are relatively modest, which presupposes that you're not building factories, you're outsourcing the manufacturing of the batch product. Could you talk a little bit about that? Who's investing into the company, and the sums of money that you're raising, what are they going to be used for in the course of the next couple of years?
Thanks, Simon. Let me maybe take the competitive landscape, and Andrew can weigh in on use of funds. So just to go back to that slide on the landscape, that existed in 2015, it hasn't really changed since then. So there were technologies claiming biodegradation, but all they're really doing is oxidating plastic. So that's you take plastic and you break it, you leave the crystallinity intact. So you might be effective in the amorphous region, but by leaving those hard crystalline regions of the polymer structure intact, you're creating microplastic. So those technologies have existed for 20 or 30 years, widely known as not being credible, but in some countries and in some businesses who are desperate, they've done quite well, actually, but they're not scientifically credible. So a big part of our differentiation has been showing the ability to go into the crystalline and the amorphous region to achieve that transformation, full transformation of the materials back to a wax-like state, and then to do something that they have never done, which is to kind of take it in real world conditions back to full, so CO2, water, and biomass, and have the graphs from independent, credible laboratories to show that. I guess that there's it's not really competition when it's completely not credible, but the threat would be association there. So the way we deal with that competitive threat is by rising above. It's by showing our our evidence, our data, and getting it out there through the standards that we have been able to create, and seeing that ripple effect happening for that standard now all around the world. I think a more credible and persistent threat will be the composting lobby, particularly in markets like China, where they have convinced the Chinese government to bring online those end-of-life facilities and that infrastructure. The capex does exist there to create that as a solution, and there is a vision in China to kind of become a bioplastics hub, which needs composting, just to be clear, for the world. But best case, over the next 10 years, that scales from 1-2 million tons production to 7-8-9 million tons production. Again, we're talking about 400 million tons of global production, where China is the largest polyolefins market in the world. So they still need a solution for polyolefins that is credible and that can scale. So we see this as being part of the solution, but we see ourselves as being a much more scalable solution. They obviously see us as a huge competitive threat because we're cheaper, more scalable, more credible. So part of our policy and stakeholder ground game is making sure that all of the different influencers and decision makers understand what it is we're able to do, and it's based on scientific evidence and data that can give, you know, those communities confidence that, you know, we are real, we're here to stay, we're well funded and well backed, you know, and capable of making a dent in this particular problem. Andrew, do you want to pick up on the use of funds?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, Simon, there were a couple of questions in there. So use of funds, we are, you know, we're raising up to 20 with significant headroom within there. So we're not making new types of plastic. So the key to what we're doing is we are providing a small proportion of what is the traditional way of making plastic. So our addressable market is somewhere around 60 million tons of polyethylene and polypropylene, which goes into the packaging market around the world. We don't disrupt that manufacturing stream. We dose our technology at 2% by weight, and it goes into the traditional manufacturing process. So we don't need to build facilities that cost a couple of $100 million to make 20,000 tons of product. We can provide our solution at 2% by weight into the already existing infrastructure. So that makes it incredibly scalable. The second part is we work with specialty chemical master batch producers to make our technology. It's always protected. We have a global patent published in multiple markets, and we work around protecting know-how, ingredient lists, etc., etc. That's a big part of our IP protection strategy. So again, we're not building a facility to make our technology either. The use of funds is to grow the business, to get to that cash flow positive, to grow the commercial capability, work further on the regulatory programs, which is the team and the advocacy work that we need to do around the world, and continue to do the R&D development work. So, you know, we continue to improve the solution to either improve the swiftness at which you get that flick of the switch from stability into the degradation, to improve the product sector that we can attack. So go from traditional packaging to some certain other types of packaging that are maybe slightly more difficult, to improve the fibers and non-woven stuff. So outside of packaging, we work in wipes, face masks, tea bags, all that fiber stuff that doesn't sit within that 60 million ton application. So yeah, so it is very scalable. We have traditionally raised our money from families and high net worths. We've done that because we have a couple of things. We have very good connectivity within that network. Our board is very influential in that position. So we're chaired by Mark Bolland, who's the former chief executive of Marks and Spencer's, and prior to that, Morrison's, sits on the board of Coca-Cola, etc. We have you know, a number of our board members are highly influential in industry and in the high net worth circles. And we've also found that they're supportive in getting access to influential parts, whether that be in the brand and retail chains, whether it be in the regulatory and government markets, etc., etc. And to go to one single fund, they don't really get the nuance of what we're looking to do, and also they tend to be either very specifically focused on pure performance, but not actually that flexible on understanding that we need to work in multiple different markets. So we want them to help us in multiple different markets.
Thanks, that's great. Just a couple more questions coming through. You talked about changing the way we think about plastics so that we move away from this notion that plastics have to be recycled and that they can biodegrade instead. But one of the great problems is plastic bottles and plastic bags. Will your technology in due course be able to address the problem of plastic bottles? I realize that plastic bottles are probably the items that are most readily recycled, and pickers across the developing world are usually seeking out plastic bottles because they get some sort of value from those. But will the technology be able to address the problem of PET, I think it is.
Yeah, no, because the as you said, Simon, the dominant solution there is to close the loop. So when I talked about the 14% that we're claiming as recycled and only the 2% that's actually being recycled, that's mostly PET and HD. HD is your milk bottles coming back into the loop, and PET coming back into the loop again is the the majority. And even in markets like India, 86% of PET is fully recycled, going back into the loop. Also, technically, the crystallinity of PET is a difficult beast. It's a really tough material to break down. So for all those reasons, the best solution for PET is just keep closing that loop, keep turning that over and over again. Plastic bags, we're one of the 4 technologies approved by Niti Aayog in India to be used in plastic bags. And the tonnage there is absolutely huge. It's staggering, to the point where if you put it in your business plans, you'd look like you're completely you'd lost the plot. So plastic bags, straws, a lot of these banned applications in India where we are now exempt are all proven. We've tested them in markets like Georgia is another example where plastic bags have been banned unless you're proven to the British standard. So we're able to evidence that and scaling in that market, and we'll use that as a hub to drive a ripple effect across the rest of Eastern Europe. So bags, yes. PET bottles, no. There are polypropylene containers. You can use polypropylene for bottles as well. Yogurts, typically use polypropylene over PET.
Thanks. And maybe one for you, Andrew. What is likely to be the exit strategy for investors in this company, and for your founders, of course?
Yeah, sure. So difficult to predict timescales. I think it's likely to be within the coming 3 years. Could be quicker, could be slightly slower. The most obvious acquirer or exit for the business is an acquisition by a strategic player, someone sitting within the petrochemicals value chain. There are master batch producers, specialty chemical master batch producers who are of very big size that could be an obvious target for our exit. The business is highly attractive as you scale from a cash flow producing point of view, so therefore becomes interesting to a financial house, PE player, etc., who might specialize in this kind of arena. There are lots of players that specialize in plastic packaging and the subsidiary parts of that value chain. And it also could be potentially an IPO opportunity. I think the IPO is less likely. You kind of need to have a different kind of animal or group of animals running the business and want to take that on. But there's no reason why that couldn't be implemented as well.
Neil, we have quite a few participants on the call from Asia. I'd just like you to reiterate some of the partnerships you have in Asia. You mentioned Indorama, I think Formosa Plastics, some of these large-scale companies which you're already doing business with. Could you give us just a little bit more? You appear to be, albeit brilliant British technology, you nonetheless appear to be something of an Asian company today.
Yeah, indeed. Well, look, I think you go both where the energy is and also when you're mission driven where the issues are. And the gravity towards Asia has also found us some great partners. You mentioned some of them, Simon, but also the likes of SCG, in Thailand have been very supportive. Rungrut, the CEO, and I met the Thai environment minister together at COP26, as part of their partnership and their commitments to us, but also just meeting environment ministers together to show their excitement for the technology. We have, you mentioned Formosa, developing a partnership with Reliance in India. So this is very important for Niti Aayog, the technical advisory panel to Prime Minister Modi, that as we launch in India, that it is made in India, so that it's an end-to-end solution, manufactured there, prototyped there, tested there, with supporting policies there. So we very much dial down the not just the Britishness, but the Westernness of the business in some markets where it is appropriate, and we do that through picking the right partners. So what we're doing with Reliance is bringing the technology in to the resin pellet. So as Reliance does 2.8 million tons of PP, 1.8 million tons of polyethylene, they're 3% of Indian GDP, they're hugely influential with government. They've been through all the technical due diligence with us, and we're now launching or preparing to launch resin grades together with them. So they're a great partner, but have been introduced to us by Niti Aayog to help facilitate scale, as well as to make sure that it is properly seen as an Indian solution and not, overtly Western. So those partnerships are great. We don't have many. I think the key is, business of our size and stage, when we do have a partner, we're all completely invested in it. It doesn't matter where you are in this business. If you're in supply chain, if you're in R&D, if you're in a commercial role, you're all connected to the customer. We're all connected to their projects, to their people, to their requirements, and driving those projects together and responding to issues as and when they happen. So because of the depth required to make that work, we don't do many partners, but we work with the biggest and the best, and that's also about trying to solve the problem as well, because you need their scale if you want to make a dent on the issue.
Well, I think unless there's anything else that you feel is essential to get across, and I think we've missed, Andrew, we'll probably bring today's session to a close. We do have quite a number of questions which individuals would like to pose directly to you, and we'll put you in touch.
Sure.
We are certainly very, very excited by this company. As you know, we've been investing into British technology, largely spin-outs from UK universities. And given that you're sitting in the Imperial Innovation Hub in London, and you've employed a lot of PhDs from British universities, we certainly include you within that category. So you'll be very much part of the second iteration of our British Innovation Fund, which is due to be launched imminently. We really thank you very much for today. Excellent presentation, really compelling story. And we look forward to further interaction over the coming days. Thank you very much, gentlemen. We'll bring this session to a close.
Thank you, Simon.
Thanks, Simon. Thanks, Alex.